Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl, and this is going to be my reaction video to the game Sunday night against the Arizona Cardinals. And unfortunately, as I thought, the Eagles were not able to win that game. And unfortunately, though, the worst part of it wasn't the fact that they lost the game, it's how they lost it and the way they looked doing it. I would have hoped that they would have made it a little more respectable than it was. In watching that game, even in the first half when things were still close and within one score, I never really felt like they had a chance in that game. I say that because when the Eagles had the ball in the first half, there was only one possession where they had the ball where they could have taken the lead. In other words, they were playing catch-up even in the first half. And it almost seemed like the Cardinals scored when they needed to in the first half. There was a few drop balls by the Cardinals in that first half that it could have been a lot worse going into halftime than just being down by a touchdown. But as far as the end of the first half goes, obviously one of the big things people were talking about after the game was the decision to go for it on fourth and less than one, down close to the end zone there, rather than take the 3 points in the field goal. And frankly, I was okay with the decision at the time. I thought that the Eagles needed a touchdown there. It was clear that field goals weren't going to do it in that game, so I thought that that was the right decision to go for it. And even using Ryan Matthews over DeMarco Murray, I know there was a lot of discussion on the broadcast about that, given the fact that DeMarco Murray had a lot of success in those short yardage situations. But even that, I think it says a lot about DeMarco Murray and what Chip Kelly thinks of him both as a person and a player, that he didn't use him there. And really, when it comes down to him, and I think more of it was the player and the fact that DeMarco was really underproduced there. But in terms of the way I looked at that and the result of what happened and the fact that they didn't get it, frankly, once again, I had no problem with Chip the coach going for that. But the problem is Chip the coach needs to blame Chip the GM. And this is what I was talking about when I did my first video that that I posted after the Thanksgiving game that I was so upset about. And that is the fact that he has really not done anything to help the offensive line. And there's been no replacement of the guys that they've lost. They did nothing to replace them in the preseason. And that has really shown in these kind of situations where they didn't have any sort of push in the middle. You've got an undersized center and you've got two inexperienced guards, so they have no push in the center of that line, which means you can't just go for the barrel through and try and get that extra little bit of yardage. And I think that that's really sort of has hurt them. And has really hurt DeMarco Murray, frankly, in terms of his production, because he is that downhill runner, and those end runs that Shady was able to do so well, DeMarco Murray, that's just not his game, and not having a strong center of the line has really hurt them. And I think that, if anything, Chip the coach, like I said, needs to blame Chip the GM for that fact. But let's take a look at the game as a whole. And specifically, let's look at some of the stats. And when the score is as lopsided as it was in this game, you can expect some of the stats are going to reflect that as well. And that's certainly the case in this game. First downs, obviously, significantly in favor of the Cardinals. Total yardage in favor of the Cardinals, but maybe not as much as you'd think it was. And that has to do with the fact that the Eagles actually were able to have a lot of yardage through the air. A lot of that was towards the end of the game when they're trying to catch up. But the Eagles were able to move the ball through the air, and they actually outgained the Cardinals in passing. But the flip side of that is the rushing and the difference in the rushing yards. And that's really where the Cardinals won this game. And the Eagles were never able to stop the Cardinals' ground game, and that much was clear. And that goes then to the next statistic, which is time of possession, which is obviously weighted heavily in favor of the Cardinals. But even with all those stats, as much as they were in favor of the Cardinals for the most part, sometimes other things that can happen that can sort of turn the game in your favor, and that's usually turnovers. And even that statistic went heavily against the Eagles, as they turned the ball over 4 times, and the Cardinals did not turn the ball over at all. And when you have stats like that, that's the reason why you end up with a score as lopsided as it was. So where do we go from here? As I had said in my prediction video before the game, this game really didn't matter in terms of trying to win the division. The Eagles still control their own destiny since they do play the Redskins and Giants. So all they have to do is win these last 2 games, and they win the division. But the broader question is does that even really matter? And I say that because it's clear to me that after this game, the Eagles cannot compete with the elite teams in this conference. Even forget about even the AFC, but they can't even compete with the elite teams in this conference. So teams like the Panthers, the Cardinals, the Packers, the Seahawks, they're not going to be able to beat one of those kind of teams. Maybe they get lucky in a wild card round and they can figure out a way to win a game, but they're not going to be able to do that for a prolonged effort. And if you look at the game, even the 2 touchdowns we did score in this game, they were a result of defensive mistakes. The first one, they didn't have enough players on the field, and the second one was just an absolutely blown coverage that Matthews was able to get that wide open. So when you really think about it, even in this game, the points that we did put up were sort of misleading. So if you're really thinking about where this team is going in terms of this year is concerned, not to say that I want to see them lose, because I'm always going to root for them to win. But if they don't win and they don't get into the playoffs, ultimately, I don't think that's going to be the worst thing for us long term. And that's unfortunately a sad thing to say, because that's usually not where you want to be as a fan. You want to be able to really think your team has a chance if they get in the postseason. But right now, as things stand, if the Eagles were to win the division, that first game would be against the Seahawks. And granted, it would be in Philadelphia. But I don't see how the Eagles would be able to stop Seattle, who has really started to turn things around and has gotten to the point where they look like a much better team and much more like the team that has gone to the last 2 Super Bowls for the NFC. So from that perspective, I just don't see where this thing would end up from a positive perspective for the Eagles, even if they do win this division. However, all that said, I will be rooting for them, and I'll try and check in later this week before the Redskins game to give you my prediction for that game. And until then, fly Eagles fly.